Hi, good afternoon or evening, everybody, depending on what your time zone is. I am going to record a little bit of the updates to Social Security benefits, as well as some really important topics that I want to review with you regarding Social Security and work. And after that, I'm going to go ahead and open up in the chat or the Q&A, whichever you would prefer. Here, probably because it's a meeting, I think the chat is better. So please let me know what your questions are. And if you don't have any, that just means I did a great job. So let's talk a little bit about two important updates for Social Security for this year, 2024. First and foremost, you may have already seen Mark's posting in the feed here in the Public Benefits 101 space. And that posting was all about something called in-kind support and maintenance, ISM. So the advocates around the country have been working hard and lobbying Social Security to drop ISM altogether because it's a big pain for people to keep track of what they are spending or the market value of what someone has given them for food and shelter. There's a list in under the Social Security POMS that's the Program Operations Manual System that lists out what is considered shelter, the types of things like fuel, heating bills, etc., including rent, mortgage payments, taxes, and so forth. So in-kind support and maintenance is something that really keeps people in poverty, even more so than ever before. It only applies to SSI, not SSDI payments, and it reduces the federal SSI benefit by 1/3, or the presumed maximum value of the food and shelter. So back at the end of March, on March 30th, the SSA announced that they were finally dropping food as something that is counted towards ISM. That's great, but really what we need to do is drop the shelter part. It's one thing to have to try to live on the meager amount that Social Security pays, which is, under $1,000 for the federal benefit. And then if your state also has a state supplement, then whatever that amounts to. But the fact of the matter is there's not enough housing for all of the disabled people who are low income out there in the US. And some markets like Boston, New York City, Chicago, Los Angeles, San Diego, they are so expensive. They're too expensive for people to ever be able to pay the fair market rent in their area with their $900 a month. And the federal government, when it's calculating what people should pay for their shelter, is 1/3 of their income. Well, nobody's going to be able to find shelter for $400 a month or less. That's just not going to happen. So what happens a lot is that people live with family members. They live with a spouse, a caregiver, somebody who is letting them stay and offering them the cost of shelter for less than the fair market value of what they're offering. And that's the way that people with disabilities survive, a huge majority of them. So the food part of the ISM calculation is not that big of a deal, not that big of a help, but it's something. And there's a huge lobby going forward to drop the shelter piece as well. And I do think that eventually we will be successful. Why do I think that? Because we all know that there's a housing shortage out there. And in addition to that, it's a big pain in the butt, to say the least, for the staff. It's going to save so much staff hours. It'll make redetermination much less complicated, much less burdensome, both for the benefits recipient and also for the staff at the SSA. So let's see what happens going forward. The ISM dropping food as part of the calculation does not become effective until September 30th, 2024 this year, but it's still a welcome change. Anything moving in the right direction with SSA is a welcome change, considering that we haven't had that $2,000 asset limit raised since the mid 1980s. So we're talking 40 years. Yeah, that's crazy. All right, let's talk about overpayments. So overpayments are just such a burden and a beast to deal with. How you get an overpayment is that you end up in a situation where you have worked and you might even be on top of everything and actually reporting all your income. But Social Security is so far behind in calculating that they're catching up to people years and years and years later. And we'll go through the calculations for SSI and SSDI and what happens when you're working. But Social Security Commissioner has just announced plans to mitigate the overpayment burden that people have been dealing with. So starting March 25th, 2024 this year, 100% is not going to be the default recovery rate. When a person who receives an overpayment letter doesn't respond to the repayment demand, and a lot of times these letters never show up where they're intended to because they go to a wrong address or they're just somehow routed wrong. Between Medicaid and Social Security, I swear, the delivery rate is fairly low to people. So, and this is from professional 30 years of experience saying this, that many people truthfully never receive the letters that Social Security or Medicaid says that they're mailing to them. So instead, SSA is going to use a 10% default. So when they start taking money out of people's checks automatically because there's an overpayment that they've calculated, if someone doesn't call them or work with them to arrange an alternative repayment, they're going to default to only taking 10% of the check. It's not great, but it's better than having them just cut the check off until they've been repaid. Social Security is going to be shifting the burden of showing the lack of fault away from the claimant and over to SSA. This is huge. Also, claimants can get approval for a 60-month repayment agreement just by verbally confirming what their income is and their ability to repay. So if you have an overpayment letter, and I've got so many people that have been calling me with these, jump on to a call with Social Security and just get a repayment plan set up if you don't have any kind of defense. So SSA is working on creating policies, making it easier to request overpayment waivers and also repayment during this time. And in addition, there are a lot of changes to who can get an overpayment waived and how you get it waived. So it's important that you touch base with your local community organization that can help with this. Where can you go? So You can go to your local disability resource center, wherever that is. You can speak to a legal clinic in your area. So, for example, in my area in Massachusetts, it's the Metro West Legal Clinic. You can go to nonprofit organizations that help just with these things. So we have in Massachusetts the Disability Law Center. In Georgia, there's a huge resource, and the organization is called Bobby Dodd, DODD. And there are just a number of other places to go. If all else fails, you can hire an attorney to help. And for some people, it's worth doing that because their overpayment, that letter that they get says, hey, you owe us back $35,000 or $50,000 or whatever, a ridiculous thing like that. There is a period during COVID, during the initial phase of COVID, where if you have a COVID reason for not being able to report income or deal with, your Social Security payment situation, you can automatically get waived. And then during the next 2 years after 2020, there is another set of criteria that you may be able to meet to get your overpayment waived. So it's really great to take a shot and try to do that. And if all else fails, set up a repayment plan, talk to them about what you can afford to repay. I'm sure that for most of you, that's nothing. But if you can talk with them about paying back, that 10% or even 5%, they're sort of gravitating towards defaulting to that 10%, but you can get it down as low as you need to. I hope that helps. I know that wasn't as extremely detailed as I would like it to be, but there is a lot of information and support out there about overpayments and waivers. Okay, now let's talk a little bit about Social Security and work. Okay, so you know that there are two types of Social Security federal benefits. They're SSI, which is means tested, limited income, limited assets. And then there's SSDI, which is not means tested, but which is based on paying into the system. This may mean income from the disabled person's own work, but it also might mean eligibility under a parent's work record. Okay, so for SSI, who's eligible? Anyone who is blind, disabled under the Social Security definition of disability, or elderly. You must have limited assets under $2,000, as I mentioned, still that low. And you must have limited income because in many situations, there's going to be a dollar for dollar reduction based on the income that you have. Now, compare that to SSDI, where blind or disabled workers, not older workers, but blind or disabled workers or disabled adult children or a widower of a retired or deceased worker might be eligible for a benefit, a dependence benefit. So you need enough work credits either from you or from the person that you're dependent on to qualify. And you do get eligibility 24 months after your initial eligibility. You get eligibility for Medicare. In many states, most states actually, if you have SSI, you automatically become qualified for Medicaid right away. So what is that disability definition? Just to review for many of you, it's a mental or physical impairment expected to last at least 12 months or result in death before that 12 months is up. And it must directly affect a person's ability to work at substantial gainful activity, SGA. That is a term of art in Social Security world. If you are under age 18 and Therefore, a child, your disability definition is a little different. It must directly affect the disability must directly affect the child's ability to reach age-appropriate developmental milestones or to engage in age-appropriate activities of daily living. It's a little easier as a child to meet the disability definition, but much, much harder to meet the income and asset requirements for SSI. So income limits. Income is separated out into two kinds of income, working income and non-working income. And the reason that we care about that is because as a whole, Social Security, SSA, treats work income much more favorably than non-working income. Income is counted in the month that it is received, and if it's not spent, then in the next month, it becomes a countable resource or an asset. So let's talk about the impact of income on benefits. First and foremost, let's talk about SSI. So everything that Social Security does is to encourage work or trial work. So you're trying at work. And obviously, this is with an eye to eventually becoming self-sufficient and getting off Social Security. However, trialing work doesn't necessarily mean a means to an end of getting kicked off. So the first $20 of any income at all is disregarded every month. And these are SSI rules. And then the next $65 of working income is disregarded. And those numbers have not changed in a very, very long time. After that $85 total, every dollar of work only reduces your SSI payment by 50 cents. So 50 cents on the dollar for work income. So to do some simple math, we're going to do math today. If you have a $500 SSI payment and you earn $385 from work, see how I did the simple math there? You are going to have $85 of that $385 from work completely disregarded, leaving you with $300 countable from work income. Only $150 or 50% of that is counted and reduces your $500 SSI payment to $350. So the net result is that if you work, you're going to have income of $735 total, $350 for your Social Security benefit because you only lost $150 out of that $385 that you worked. And then you're going to have $385 from your work income that you get to keep. So $350 SSI plus $385 of work income becomes $735. If you don't work, you only get $500 in SSI benefit. So you can see that it does benefit you to work. Work does not affect most state supplement payments. Non-working income has a much more difficult or a more detrimental, that's a good word, effect on your SSI benefit. And we're still talking about SSI here. So again, the first $20 of any income is disregarded, but everything after that is going to be a dollar for dollar reduction in your benefit. And that includes child support payments. Even if the child support is paid to the other parent, it is assumed by Social Security to be available to benefit and to meet the daily living needs of the SSI recipient. So there's going to be 100% dollar for dollar reduction after the first $20 of any income. There are certain payments that are not countable as income. And again, you want to go to the POMS, the Program Operations Manual System, to check out what they are. But for example, some of them would be veterans benefits, State agency payments like DDS in Massachusetts, pays self-directed support. That is not countable against SSI benefits. Sheltered workshop payments, we don't really have those in Massachusetts anymore, but some of your states may still have that. Tax refunds, AFDC payments, and things like that. So you want to take a look at that list and see if anything that you have on that list meets the criteria as non-countable income. But everything else is going to be countable, like investment income, pensions, annuities, etc. So remember we talked about asset limits for Social Security, and I just want to quickly review that it's a $2,000 asset limit for all assets for an individual and $3,000 for a married couple. There are, again, a complete list of non-countable assets as well as non-countable income. So you want to go to the Palms, but virtually all assets are countable. And some assets that are usually forgotten, retirement assets, even though you can't get at them, people feel like it should not be countable, but it is. Any kind of joint account that's held with another person, it's countable against the SSA recipient. UGMA accounts, savings bonds, things that people forget, stock certificates, money in a safe deposit box. You have to count that as well. You're allowed to have one vehicle, and if you have a home and you own the home yourself as the SSI recipient, it's an exempt asset if it's your home and you live in it. Most of the time that doesn't come up because most people with an SSI benefit are not going to be able to afford to stay in their own home. However, if there's a combination of this home owned by you and a trust that helps to pay all of the maintenance of that home, then, possibly you can make that work. Something that people often question or aren't sure about are 529 educational plans. Those 529 plans are non-countable, as are 529A plans as well, otherwise known as ABLE accounts. Okay, let's talk about SSI cash-related work incentives. So they call this set of rules work incentives because they really are trying to encourage you to work. There's a student earned income exclusion. So between the ages of 18 and 22, or just say like any student under the age of 22, will have a much higher monthly income exclusion because we really want Social Security to Social Security really wants our students to try work and see if when they get out of their school program at age 22, if they will be able to work and support themselves. Remembering that Social Security's idea of supporting oneself is very, very low. For example, in 2022, I know this is now 2 years ago, but these are the figures that I have on my slides. It was $2,040 per month of work income would be excluded, which is very high. And anything under that would not impact the benefit at all. So the student would be able to get their Social Security benefit and work. And that had a maximum of $8,230 per year. So 4 months like that. So that means that a student can work during the summer, a student can work part-time during the week, and it would not count against you. There's also something called impairment-related work expenses, IRWE. And half of all IRWE costs are given back in SSI payments. So what does this mean? When you have an expense that's related to your disability that allows you to work, such as service animal costs, specialized transportation, specialized equipment, even medical copays. If that psychologist or that therapist is critical to a person being able to access work, or copays for medications too, things like that. The benefits recipient must pay those costs out of pocket. Somebody else cannot pay them for them. And half of those expenses are returned back. So let's say that you had $100 a month of expenses and your work lowers your SSI payment a bit. You'll get $50 back from that $100 early expense that you put forth. You'll get $50 back in your SSI check. Now, this is a great thing, except for the fact that the reporting is a beast. It's a beast, and you're always behind waiting for Social Security to review what you send in and to, give it back to you. So there's this cycle that just doesn't work well. Blind work expenses, 100% of the blind work expenses are given back in the SSI payments. So same kinds of expenses, visual and sensory aids, service animal costs, specialized transportation, and so forth. And then there's something called a PASS, a plan to achieve self-support for SSI recipients. Now, PASS is pretty much all but gone. And that's because we have ABLE accounts now. But what it was an applicant or an applicant for the PASS would find out what kinds of items that they needed to be able to access work. So a training program, specialized items, some services, anything that they needed to reach a work goal that they had. And PASS can allow the participant to save for these costs. It lets the person with a disability set aside money for purchases, whether it's installment payments, down payments, etc., and they would be able to go over the $2,000 asset limit and not get cut off. The plan can include supplies to start a business. It can include school expenses, equipment, even a new wheelchair or a vehicle or a computer, things like that. And what you need to do is, after you find out what these items cost, you write up a plan, you submit it to Social Security, and they let you know that the plan is A-OK. And then you go ahead and you save towards those items or towards that plan. But ABLE accounts allow you to do that in a much more efficient way now, without having to report all of this stuff to Social Security and follow through on this contract that you have. So PASS is pretty much passe. Let's talk about SSDI work incentives. This is where things get a little bit more hairy. If you didn't like the math that we did before, you are going to hate this math going forward. So there are multiple SSDI work incentives. There's a trial work period, extended period of eligibility, and IRWI also. We have IRWI here, special conditions, employer subsidies, income averaging, and unsuccessful work attempts. We'll go through the more common aspects of these things. So what's a trial work period? This is where a lot of people get caught up and trapped because they are not counting what their trial work period number is. Again, I have 2022 numbers, but I will be happy to post the 2024 numbers for you. Also going to post the 2024 SSA booklet that talks about work and work incentives, and that has all the numbers in there. So you can have a 9-month period that you go over the trial work period number. So again, remember, this is all about trying to work. And every year, the threshold number for trial work period goes up a little bit. So in 2022, it was $970 a month. It's a little over $1,000 a month now in 2024. So when you reach your trial work period threshold number 9 times within a 5-year period or 60-month period, and they don't have to be consecutive, then you have entered into an extended period of eligibility, which means that you are starting your descent off of SSDI. So what happens is that it's pretty hard to count all of this stuff, and not all income counts. It has to be work income from active work. If you get paid a bonus, if you get paid holiday pay, if you get paid sick time or vacation time, none of that counts. So just looking at a paycheck and giving them your rough total number is not completely, or may not be completely accurate. This requires so much calculating, and people very often don't know that they've hit their trial work period threshold, and they don't usually need 5 years to do it. So you're only allowed to have one trial work period per claim. Okay, so if you don't hit the trial work period 9 times in 60 months, then you kind of start over again. After the trial work period is met, that's when they start looking at substantial gainful activity. You've rolled into that extended period of eligibility, the EPE, which is 36 months long. The first month is a freebie. You do not have to worry about hitting that substantial gainful activity amount during that first month. And then the next 35 months in that 36-month period, every month that you hit that next threshold, which is called substantial gainful activity or SGA, you don't get a payment. So this SGA is now over $1,400. It actually might even be higher than that. It was $1,350 for the disabled in 2022 and $2,280 for blind workers in 2022. If your SGA is consistently met, then your benefits are going to be suspended after that 3-year period. If you have an extended period of eligibility where you have not met SGA, then you can go ahead and request that your trial work period be restored. So it's basically a safety net beginning the month after your trial work period, again, lasting for 3 continuous years. And it guarantees cash benefits if your gross earnings are below SGA, but just remember what calculates those gross earnings. So your SSDI case is going to remain open during the EPE no matter what, even if you don't get a payment benefit because of the fact that you've hit that SGA number. Case closure can't occur until your EPE has ended, so 3 years. Your grace period has been completed. That's the first month that SGA is met. That's called the cessation month. And your gross monthly earnings are at or above SGA. So if your gross monthly earnings are not at SGA, you don't necessarily get kicked off at the end of your EPE. You have to go ahead and have that conversation with Social Security. Now, your case can close anytime if you are found to be medically improved. That is not usually the case for most of my people, but it's possible that that could happen. So I just want to point out that many, many people will receive an overpayment letter and a case closure letter. And it goes back years and years and years, like 10 years, 15 years. And they're looking at your first of all, your trial work period, then your EPE. And you never get contacted in all this time. Now, that's not across the board. Some people have gotten letters saying, hey, here's your trial work period. You're now in EPE. But most of the people that I talk to, they are getting letters that say that they owe back like $35,000 or $50,000 for 3 years, because they can only go back 3 years of benefits that were paid, quote, erroneously. This is where my initial conversation with you about overpayments is so important. You should really know if this was not your fault, if the calculation from Social Security is wrong, and if you have any affirmative defenses, like you should have been claiming IRWI, for example. IRWI for SSDI recipients is different than for SSI recipients. It's the full cost deducted from the reported monthly gross earnings. So this works very much in your favor. If you are very close to the hairy edge on the trial work period or on SGA, and you have, even a few expenses every month that can be related to your disability and accessing work, you want to go ahead and file for that IRWI, because that IRWI is going to bring your income number down. So let's say that your income number is $1,000. Your IRWI is $100 a month, and the trial work period number is $940. Well, you can see, first of all, that, there's a lot of math here, but that the $9,000 income number gets reduced to the $1,000 income number gets reduced to a $900 income number. And that is below the trial work period, whereas previously you were above the trial work period. So IRWI can be super important. You have to provide receipts. This is a pain in the butt, but well worth it to keep your benefits. And you individually, as the person who's the benefits recipient of SSDI, have to pay that expense yourself. It has to come out of your pocket. Same kind of common expenses: medical copays, medication copays, specialized equipment, specialized transportation, service animal supports, and so forth. Okay, let's talk about an unsuccessful work attempt. If you are unable to consistently earn SGA during that EPE of 36 months for 6 months or more, then that can be considered an unsuccessful work attempt. But you have to talk to Social Security about this. This unsuccessful work attempt must be due to disability or condition. You can't just quit, decide that you're not working. You can't just, for something like COVID, when everything shut down, that was, a different story as well. You can use an unsuccessful work attempt multiple times during one claim. So for one claimant, but you can't use it during the cessation month, that first month that you get for free. So after that first month, if you have 6 months in a row that you don't receive SGA, then that's an unsuccessful work attempt. And you just need to communicate with SSA about that. Okay. Lastly, let's talk a little bit about the next step. Let's say that you've met SGA, you've met your trial work period, you've met SGA, and your 3 years are up, and you get that letter from Social Security saying you're off benefits, and you don't have any affirmative defenses. You can still get expedited reinstatement if you need to get back on. So the case must have closed due to work, not disability. So that means that you can't have improved over time, medically improved. If your case closed based on your work and your income, then it's possible that you can reapply within 5 years of your case closure As long as you have the same disability as before that is causing the work issues or the earnings issues, and your earnings are below SGA due to that same disability, so not a work period, but SGA, you can receive up to 6 months of benefits while the determination is being made, and that's great. And if they find that you are not reinstated, you don't have to pay those 6 months of benefits back. So they still have your case file. It is an expedited reinstatement and not a complete new application. And that is very, very helpful. One more thing that I want to mention that is not normally in my slides, and that is something called subsidies. Subsidies are just incredible. It's an incredible help, and many people don't know about them. What is a subsidy? It's another way to reduce your the impact of your income from work so that you don't lose much of your benefit. This is particularly helpful with SSDI so that you don't ever hit trial work periods, but it can also be helpful for SSI as well. So a subsidy is where your employer subsidizes your employment so that you are not penalized for 100% of your work income. What does this look like? So I'm going to give you the easy one first. We're going to do some more math, and then we're going to talk about a little bit more complex. So if you have a job that looks like I'm a bagger in a grocery store, and your job description has 5 tasks or 5 duties that go along with that job, and you are given that job along with non-disabled peers, but they are doing 5 tasks and you're only able to do 3. If your supervisor signs off on a very brief piece of paper that explains that, and again, it's like check boxes, and it's not a big deal for the supervisor. And generally speaking, you have to do that once a year. And then you need to fill out a long form application. It's long, but it's also check boxes. And you only do that at the beginning of the subsidy. And you can show that the subsidy is this 60%. Let's say that your work income was $1,000 a month, but you get this 60% attribution or a 40% subsidy. So now Social Security is only going to count $600 a month against you. And you can see that that very helpful math can keep you below the trial work period number so that you never hit that extended period of eligibility and you never have to worry about SGA. So that subsidy can be really helpful, and it's not hard to get. In fact, I've never had anybody get denied. So there's more complicated ways. Not everybody has a task list that they can easily point to that says, hey, it's 10% subsidy because I can do 9 out of 10 tasks or something like that. But many people get extra help at work. They have a supervisor who works, or a peer who works closely with them and supports them during their workday. It doesn't have to be an official capacity, right? It doesn't have to be somebody who is trained as a job coach, but you have been able to, as the disabled worker, take more breaks, get, lots of extra training and support, ask a lot more questions, take longer to learn your job, or be confident in your job. Maybe you work a shorter shift. Maybe you work less days per week than a non-disabled peer in the same job. All this means is that you are not performing market value work, but getting market value pay. The employer is subsidizing by paying you more than the value of the work that you are producing. There's nothing wrong with that. It's awesome. And many, many workplaces do accommodate people with disabilities. It goes beyond an accommodation, though. It really needs to be a discount in the work that you do. So I hope that explains it. And I hope that you really get a lot out of this webinar or meeting about Social Security. I'm not seeing any questions right now. If people have questions, I'm going to stop the recording here and I will post this. And let me stop here and then we'll check in about questions.